you ready for lineup?
The surface wind is 0758 knots. You're clear to take off and display.
Welcome to RAF Fairford, home of the world's largest military air show, this year playing host to more than 300 aircraft from 26 nations. It's a two-day event, more than 18 hours of continuous flying from the world's most exciting aerobatic display teams. And this show is special because it's a celebration of anniversaries. 40 years for the Hercules transport plane, which has played such a vital role in both war and peace. 25 years for Concorde, which underwent its test program here at Fairford. And 75 years for the RAF Benevolent Fund, which organises the whole event. Well, it's a show packed with colour and excitement, and there are a few more exciting displays than the one you're about to see. They're lining up on the runway now, the Italian Air Force team, the Frecce Tricolore. Frecce Tricolore means three coloured arrows, and those colours, of course, the colours of the Italian flag. This is the largest of all the jet display teams, a main formation of 9 and 1 solo pilot. The MB339 is a trainer, but it can also carry weapons. It takes just a few hours to convert these aircraft into armed configuration. This year's solo pilot is Ronaldo Rossi. The Frecce claim to fly closer than any of the other teams. There's only about 10 feet between their wingtips, so everything has to be done with absolute precision. The Italian Air Force has had an aerobatic team since 1951. The Frecce have now carried out more than 1,700 air shows in Europe, Africa, the Middle East and America. In some of the turns, the solo pilot pulls up to 7G. That means he's being pressed into his seat by a force of around half a ton. But this is the part of the act that everyone loves, and it shows just how well the aircraft handles at low speed when the pilot's controls are least responsive. Just listen to the enthusiasm of the team commentator.
Crazy flight that, of course, has only the name and not the kind of flight, but show you the maneuverability of the aircraft and the skill and the ability of the pilot of the Frecce Tricolore. There's an Italian pilot.
The Frecce Tricolore. Well, the International Air Tattoo has been held here in Gloucestershire since 1985, drawing crowds of up to 200,000 people. And with the planes come more than 3,000 aircrew, so for this weekend, Fairford becomes a busy international airport. In recent years, there's been a growing number of participants from Eastern Europe, the old enemy.
Sequence, that is...
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay,
Fine.
perfect,
Okay.
perfect, yes.
But pilots seem much the same, whatever they fly and wherever they come from. Here are the Czechs.
We don't fly today.
And here's their team manager, Miroslava Skopalikova.
She is the mother of this team.
All smiles here, but their planes are no laughing matter. This is the MiG-21, the so-called fish bed. And if any aircraft was the symbol of Cold War days, it's this one. For many years, the MiG-21 was the frontline fighter of the Warsaw Pact. It's now an old aircraft, but it flies at twice the speed of sound and is still a force to be reckoned with. Here's the more up-to-date MiG-29, the Fulcrum, flown here by Lieutenant Colonel Josef Dunaj of Slovakia. At last year's show, two Russian MiG-29s collided, though fortunately without serious injury. The Russians didn't bring any this year. And this is a really uncomfortable maneuver. The pilot's experiencing negative G. In other words, he's being thrown out of his seat against his straps. Here's the American-built F-16. This one's from the Dutch Air Force 313 Squadron. The F-16 first flew in 1974 and has sold to many countries, though not Britain. It's a fly-by-wire machine. That means the pilot's inputs are fed to the control surfaces by computer. In fact, the aircraft is too unstable to be flown by hand. That's the price you pay for its superb maneuverability. For most of the year, Fairford's 10,000-foot runway is hardly used. These days, the airfield is a standby base for the US Air Force. But for 3 days before the show, it's buzzing with activity as the planes arrive. Over the years, the crowds here have seen just about everything that flies, but this time the shows seem to be dominated by one type. The Lockheed C-130 Hercules has been around for 40 years, and to mark its anniversary, its owners had been invited to send one along. It was a kind of birthday party. They came from all over the world. Apparently the pipes are as popular in Jordan as in Scotland. And the aircraft, well, actually, they were all very different, showing the huge diversity of roles the venerable Hercules can perform. They've landed on the polar ice cap. The various bumps and bulges conceal all manner of radars and sensing equipment. And they come in both sexes. This one's called Snoopy. He has a kind of barber's pole, which is used for weather research. And this is the First Lady, the oldest Hercules of all. She was delivered to the US Air Force in 1957 and lives in Florida. In fact, the First Lady is no lady at all. She's a gunship. There are two Bofors cannons at the front and two 20mm Gatling guns at the back, and she saw service in Vietnam. But many people fail to notice that the guns all point one way. There are none on the other side of the aircraft.
We have crew members whose duty it is to watch out the right-hand side of the airplane while we're in left-hand orbits. So it doesn't prove to be a problem at all.
One of her main roles must be coming and flying the flag at shows like this.
Well, it was quite an honor to be chosen to come to this show, and of course it was given the place of honor at right in front of the Hercules tent here, and we're quite proud of that.
But the Hercules is a real working aircraft. As a troop transport, it's seen action in all major theatres of war since the 1960s, and its part in relief operations must have saved many thousands of lives. The RAF has more than 60 C-130s based at Lynham in Wiltshire. Here, a low-level training flight for 47 Squadron, with an airdrop over Salisbury Plain.
The height's good. Speed's going back to 125. Coming back. 15 seconds. Action 15 seconds. Station. Action stations. Red on. Red on. Green on. Green on. Load gun. Red on. Red on.
The aircraft is affectionately known as Fat Albert, which seems to suit it. Compared with today's glass cockpits, Albert's flight deck looks rather dated, but the pilots like it.
At the moment, we've got fairly antiquated navigation equipment, but we work together as a team, and certainly in this environment, we use the old-fashioned way of just using a map and basically map reading our way across the ground. I wouldn't say it's a forgiving aircraft to fly, but once you have mastered it, it is actually quite an easy aircraft to fly. And the controls handle very well, and as you can see at the moment, we're flying along at low level at about 250 miles an hour, 250 feet above the ground, and it's a nice smooth platform to fly on, and it's ideal in this sort of environment.
The Hercules can operate off dirt strips as short as 3,000 feet, and as in this demonstration, it can deploy a combat force in seconds. And here's the Khe Sanh approach, named after an airfield in Vietnam. The idea is to stay out of range of small arms fire for as long as possible. But this isn't recommended, a touchdown on the weakest link, the nose wheel. The Hercules doesn't seem to mind though, which goes to show what a rugged workhorse it is. Well, this may be a military air show, but it's not only warplanes that come to Fairford. This is one of the best-known acts on the display circuit, and you could hardly fail to invite them. Their base at the lovely Renkum airfield is only a few minutes away. Now, back in the 30s, wing walking was just that. Of course, these days, the girls are firmly strapped on. For an act like this, the safety requirements are very strict. In fact, the Crunchies are the only team in Britain allowed to do this. And this year, for the first time, the girls are allowed to climb from cockpit to wing in flight, which makes their ride to the show a little more comfortable. The Boeing Stearman was designed as a basic trainer. Back in the 1930s, more than 9,000 were built, and many are still flying.
It's like flying, I suppose, with a 6-foot door on top. There's a fantastic amount of drag. So to get the speed up, you have to dive the aeroplane almost vertically down at the ground, and you need the speed to do the aerobatic manoeuvres. So from that point of view, that's the only difference, a lot more drag. It actually makes it easier for landing, because you have like a big air brake. So you come into land, as soon as you shut the power, the aeroplane stops flying. So it's brilliant for landing. You can land in sort of 50 yards if you want it.
the Spanish Air Force team, the Patrulla Aguila. What's unique about their display is they all land together, and that could be tricky if someone burst a tyre. "25 years old and still the world's only supersonic transport. This was Concorde's first IAT visit for 8 years, and for all those involved with its development, Fairford has many memories. The aircraft was built at Bristol, but for the test programme a longer runway was needed. Those early flights drew huge crowds. The chief test pilot was Brian Trubshaw. He's now on the IAT committee, and one of his tasks before the show was to check the rehearsals for safety. So what of that first Concorde flight?
The first flight was made from Bristol to here. The whole place was jammed, and to cut a long story short, we had to open a special car park for particularly the weekends, and we used to regularly get anything up to 40,000 people watching the early flights. We had a very long build-up in the early days of the program, and we had a flight simulator, which admittedly was rather pessimistic in that it made Concorde a bit of a pig. But on the other hand, in other ways, it was reasonably accurate. So it wasn't just like stepping into something for the first time.
But that first landing turned out to be a challenge.
The pilot's eyes are a long way off the ground when the main wheels touch. Our eyes are 40 feet off the ground at touchdown, and we rely on very accurate height information from the radio altimeters. Well, on our flight, both of them failed. So it was a bit of an unfriendly thing to happen. And I had to eyeball the height, you might say, from the best judgment I could. And it worked out pretty well, but I always had to say that we probably landed half a second early.
A modest man. Well, no such problems today for Captain Stephen Wand and his crew returning from a supersonic pleasure flight. And from the world's fastest passenger jet to the first. The Comet went into service in 1952, surely one of the most beautiful aircraft ever built. This one's called Canopus, after a star. Its Rolls-Royce engines are buried in the wing roots to minimise drag. Designers of the rival Boeing 707 decided to hang their engines on pods, and that was to be the way of the future. Well, this is a Comet Mark 4C. It first flew in 1963, and throughout its life it's been based at RAF Boscombe Down, where it's used as a flying laboratory to test radio and navigation equipment. And here's the flight deck. The pilots get green leather seats. In her long life, Canopus had never appeared in a flying display, and she'd arrived at Fairford carrying a special passenger. Gordon Clark is a former Boscombe test pilot. In fact, he flew Canopus on her delivery flight. On the way to Fairford, he was allowed to sit in that green leather seat again.
They gave me control, actually. I don't know whether they cleared it or declared a purple airway or anything, but they did let me handle it, yes, and I managed to fly over my home, actually, but you shouldn't have done it.
Well, sitting in that seat on the flight deck, did it all feel very familiar to you?
Oh, fabulous. It really was. It made my day, as Reagan would say.
And did it all come back to you, flying this aircraft?
They didn't take over in a panic, so we got handed over smoothly. No, it worked very well. Very enjoyable, very enjoyable.
Canopus is the last flying Comet in the world, and soon there will be none. She's due to retire in a couple of months. In the hands of Flight Lieutenant Mark Seymour, her first and last display had one memorable moment. You don't often see airliners banked through 120 degrees. And that was something which clearly impressed the Concorde captain, watching from his own aircraft.
Well done, Comet, from the Concorde. That was brilliant.
Thanks very much.
Brought tears to the eyes.
Not such a happy day, though, for the Comet's sister aircraft, the Nimrod. On the way to their display, the crew taxied into a truck. The result, a damaged wing pod, and one imagined some harsh words. And of course the Nimrod didn't fly. But here's another British classic, the Hunter. This is the FGA Mark IX version based at Boscombe Down. Number 601 first flew in 1958. It's used to simulate ground attacks and to test radio equipment. It's one of just 4 Hunters left in service here in Britain, and it came to Fairford in the hands of squadron leader Dave Southwood. A test pilot, he's flown more than 70 different types. And this is what a roll looks like on instruments. And from one Hunter to a team of them, the Patrie Swiss. These pilots all have normal squadron duties. They get just 1 day a week to practice for displays. They've had their Hunters for 30 years. In fact, no other national display team has flown the same type of aircraft for so long. But now the Hunters are retiring. Next year, the Patrie Swiss will convert to American F-5s. And as a farewell gesture, a bottle of champagne from the IAT commentators. The Hunters will be missed.
We will phase out the once 140 aircraft fleet of Hawker Hunters, which is actually quite a shame. But as they are technically outdated, we can't keep them in squadron service any longer. It has been very special. It's not just an aircraft, it's an aeroplane, and above all it's a British aeroplane, and we've all loved the Hunter.
And there was a special moment for the Patrie Swiss as the team was introduced to King Hussein of Jordan. The King is himself a keen pilot and never misses the international air tattoo. Well, this year he'd hoped to see a display from these 2 aircraft, a Hunter and Vampire of the Royal Jordanian Air Force Historic Flight, which is based in Britain. Recently restored, these actual aircraft never served in Jordan, but the markings are authentic. Sadly, the Hunter couldn't take part in the display. Engineers had worked throughout the night to repair a ruptured fuel tank, but it couldn't be fixed in time. So the Vampire flew solo. The type was the first jet fighter acquired by Jordan. The T-Mark 55 is a 2-seat trainer version. This one was in service with the Swiss Air Force until it came to Britain in 1989.
I used to fly the Vampire. In fact, it was the first jet I ever flew, sir. And it was the aircraft that really started the Royal Jordanian Air Force.
What are your memories of it in service?
Oh, very, very fond memories.
Well, besides missing the Hunter, the King also missed the Royal Jordanian Falcons. On Sunday, his country's national display team was grounded by weather. But on Saturday, they gave a superb performance in their extra 300s. And don't they look smart? no prizes for recognising this aircraft. Originally a British design, the Harrier has since been developed by McDonnell Douglas of America, but this earlier version was sold to Spain, where they call it the Matador. Notice the 4 nozzles through which the pilot directs thrust from the Rolls-Royce engines. And here's the latest Harrier, the RAF's GR7. Here you can clearly see the underwing rails which carry its bombs and missiles. Now here's a plane that's been busy recently, the Jaguar. This one came from Lossiemouth in Scotland, where pilots go to convert to type. A squadron of Jaguars is presently based in Italy, where they fly escort duty over Bosnia. In their ground attack role, they also played an important part in the Gulf War. And here the Tornado, a much larger aircraft than the Jaguar and capable of flying at twice the speed of sound. The Tornado has what's known as variable geometry. Now watch the wings carefully. Here they're swept back to reduce drag. But as the aircraft slows, the pilot can angle them forward to provide more lift. Well, the Harrier, Jaguar and Tornado are the RAF's 3 multi-role combat aircraft. Each can perform a variety of different tasks. But 50 years ago, planes had a much more specialist role. And here are the 3 types which had the greatest influence on the outcome of World War II. 2 fighters and a heavy bomber. The Spitfire, the Hurricane and the Lancaster have come to symbolise the heroism of Britain's air crews in a war which claimed the lives of 112,000 men and women from the RAF. Much of the money raised by the RAF Benevolent Fund goes to World War II survivors and the families of those who didn't return. The IAT is its biggest source of income. But servicemen and their dependents are not the only ones to benefit from the work of the RAF Benevolent Fund. Each year it offers 9 flying scholarships to the disabled. This year they were presented by King Hussein. For these people, training for the private pilot's license will be a tough challenge. People like John Wilkinson, who was partly paralysed in a diving accident 12 years ago. He now flies a specially adapted aircraft and has logged 150 flying hours. The plane is a standard trainer, the Piper Cherokee.
Well, this particular one has a hand control set up on here which is attached to the rudder pedals, so you don't have to use your feet to control the rudders. But apart from that, it's a standard aircraft. Once you've got used to the controls, it's not really more difficult. When you first learn, it takes a bit of getting used to because you've got all your hands full and it's really quite busy. But once you're used to it, I don't think it's any more difficult than for anybody else.
Is there anything that you find particularly difficult to master?
Really just coordinating the landings, I think, is the time when you're most stretched. But once you've got those, which I think is probably difficult for any new pilot, it's fine.
Like almost all civil trainers, the Cherokee is American. In fact, Britain has had virtually no light aircraft industry for many years. One of the last to be built, the Beagle Bassett, made a rare appearance at Fairford. Its makers went out of business in 1971. The Bassett was commissioned by the Ministry of Defence as a runaround for air crews. And this is the actual aircraft in which Prince Charles learned to fly, the Regal Beagle. It's now privately owned. Now here's a much more modern civil aircraft, the strange-looking Avanti from Italy. It's a 9-seater turboprop, and those propellers are at the back. Normally its display includes a roll, and that's quite unusual for a passenger transport. In fact, the IAT regulators disallowed it on grounds of safety, but they did permit this quite dramatic stall.
Yeah, the match
has finally turned out as they were forecasting it.
A briefing for the Blue Eagles, the Army's helicopter display team. Last year they were called the Silver Eagles, but that was just to mark their 25th anniversary. Now they're back to their original name. The Eagles are Britain's second longest serving display team after the Red Arrows. They fly 1 Lynx and 4 Gazelles. The larger Lynx is an anti-tank machine, and it's one of the few helicopters which can do this. The helicopters are not painted in display colours because they're ordinary operational machines, and the pilots are full-time instructors. They do this in their spare time. Well, the Lynx and the Gazelle are military helicopters, but for sheer menace, they can't match this. The Russian-built Hind is a gunship flown here by the Czechs. There's something especially sinister about the Hind. This pair looked like a couple of huge insects as they sparred with each other. The Hind is actually a cross between a helicopter and a conventional aircraft. The projections on the side carry weapons, but in cruising flight they also act as wings. A strange machine. Now here's an aircraft that should have been at Fairford but sadly didn't make it. Shackleton number 716, one of only 3 left in flying condition, 2 of them in South Africa. This aircraft was coming from Cape Town especially for the show. Well, it turned out to be a flight of high drama, and it ended with a forced landing at night in the Western Sahara. There were 19 people on board, but no one was hurt, and one of the pilots, Colonel Derek Page, did eventually make it to the show. We caught up with him enjoying some Czech hospitality. Everyone wanted to hear his story.
About 7 hours into the flight, we experienced the number 4 engine overheating, did the precautionary shutdown on the number 4 engine and turned to the coast so that we could descend from 4,500 feet to a cooler temperature. About 30 minutes later, the number 3 engine started sparks coming out the propeller hub. In effect, we had 2 dead engines on the right-hand side. The forces, together with the 2 live engines and the power that required to maintain height, was just too much for the aircraft, and we had to throttle back on the left-hand engines again in order to maintain a stable flight. We decided at that altitude, at about 3,000 feet, that we would then do a controlled crash landing where we had time enough to do everything. And about 1:35 at night, into the dark we went, no moon. We had no idea of what the terrain looked like at the bottom, but in effect we knew that we were over the desert and that there was high ground around. At about 20 feet, the pilot flying, Major Eric Pienaar at the time, throttled back the 2 live engines, and we knew that the crash landing was about to take place. We slid along the ground. The aircraft didn't spring into the air again, settling as she lost flying speed into the soft sand, shedding bits and pieces as it went along, which was good for us because we were losing the kinetic energy in that. Once the aircraft had come to a stop, to egress from the aircraft in a fairly rapid pace. And in the end result, 19 guys, the total 19 guys on the aircraft, walked away from the accident.
The last flight of Shackleton 716, but they do have another one, so perhaps we'll see them in the future. Now Fairford is a mecca for serious plane spotters. They come from all over the country and some from overseas, for the IAT provides a chance to see planes you just don't find at other shows. Many of these people are very knowledgeable. Pilots say they know things about the aircraft they don't even know themselves.
And it's quite good this year, with being the 40th anniversary of the Hercules. Look, there's quite a few different ones here.
Every time we come to an air show, it's absolutely brilliant. It's always different and it's really enjoyable.
Is there anything coming this year that you're particularly interested in?
The French nuclear bomber. I haven't seen one before.
The Mirage?
The Mirage 4, yeah. And the Russian aircraft. It's just something that, 10 years ago, if you saw one, it'd be the last day of life,
Probably the Russians.
And here it is, the Tupolev 142, or to give it its NATO code name, the Bear. It arrived at Fairford escorted by an RAF Tornado, and in past years these two aircraft have seen a lot of each other. The Russians used to fly their Bears over the North Sea to test Britain's air defences. Tornadoes would be scrambled to intercept them. In fact, the Russians brought two Bears. This is a naval version which had never been seen in Britain before. And this is the Air Force version, the Tupolev 95, which came for the first time last year. In fact, they're difficult to tell apart. The Bear's flight deck comes in a rather smart green, which the crews find restful. This is a plane which can fly for 18 hours without refuelling, and it carries 25,000 pounds of bombs. But the pilots say they never loaded nuclear weapons, even in the old days.
As for nuclear, it can carry nuclear bombs on board, but as far as I know, we never carried them. We only carried a sample, of nuclear ammunition, right? Not pure nuclear ammunition.
Presumably he meant dummies for training. Well, those who'd hoped to see the Bear flying on Saturday were disappointed. But on day 2 it did eventually get airborne. I say eventually because this clearly isn't a plane for short runways. There were some anxious moments as it trundled off into the countryside. Fully loaded with fuel, which one assumes it was not, the takeoff run would be even longer. Well, the Russians are still a novelty at Fairford, but here's a team that comes every year. For the Red Arrows, this was just another working day. They closed the show. Their display, as always, a model of precision flying. And the radio chat gives just a hint of what it must be like to fly a jet aircraft close to the edge. Squadron leader John Rands barks out his commands as if their lives depend on it. As indeed they do.
Split, go, one right, car, one right, car, one right, car, go, roll, go.